Alright, in this video we're going to talk about properties of addition and multiplication. So the first one we're going to talk about is the identity property of addition. And what this says is if you have any real number a and you add 0, you're always going to get that same number back. So for an example, if I have 2 and I add 0, I always get 2 back. The number comes back to you. It's the identity. It identifies itself. Okay. The next property is called the commutative property of addition. And what this one says is if we have two numbers, a plus b is the same as if we would do b plus c. So for an example for this, if I add 5 plus 2, this will get you the same number as if you did 2 plus 5. It's saying you can add in any order. Okay, the next one is the associative property. I remember the associative property because of the parentheses. And what this one is saying is if we have three numbers, and I have parentheses a plus b plus c, I will get the same number if I did a plus b parentheses plus c. Okay, so an example of this one. If I do 1 plus 2 plus 3, I'm going to get the same number as if I did 1 plus 2 plus 3. Since they're all adding, it does not matter which two the parentheses are around. You're going to get the same number is what this one says. So commutative switches the order, but associative switches the parentheses. Okay, and then inverse property of addition. What this one says is if I have any number a, any real number, and I add the opposite, so the negative a, I'm always going to get 0 because negative a is the inverse of a. So for example, if I had negative 5, so for example, if I have 5 and I add negative 5, well, that's like subtracting 5, so I get 0. That's what the inverse tells us. Okay, let's talk about properties of multiplication. Let's start with the identity property in multiplication. This one is a little different. Just it uses a different number instead of 0, because if we did any number times 0, we would get 0. So the identity property in multiplication looks like if I have any number a times 1, I get the same number back. So an example of this would be 5 times 1 gets me 5. So the identity property of multiplication is multiplying by 1. Okay, commutative property of multiplication looks a lot like the commutative property of addition. What this says is if I do a times b, I'll get the same answer as if I did b times a. So 3 times 5 equals 5 times 3. So again, commutative flips the order. Associative still flips the parentheses. So in multiplication, it looks like a times b in parentheses times c is the same as if you did a times parentheses b times c. So 2 times 3 times 4 will be the same as 2 times 3 times 4. The inverse property of multiplication says if I have two real numbers, a and b, if I write a over b, and I multiply that by b over a, I should get 1, because when I flip the fraction around, they become inverses of each other. So an example of this would be 2, well, the inverse of 2 is 1 over 2, and 2 times 1 over 2 is 1. So anytime you flip a fraction around and multiply, you should get 1. There is one property that's not on here yet, and we kind of talked about it earlier. It is the 0 property of multiplication. And what this says is if I have any number times 0, I'm going to get 0 for my answer. So our example would be 12 times 0 equals 0. And those are our properties of multiplication and addition.